afternoon. Thanks for having me back. It's true to say that we were just across the river the last time I was here in the beautiful Adelaide Oval, that wonderful building there that I was able to walk out on the Oval actually for the first time because I'd never been here for a cricket test match, unfortunately. But I will try and do that this summer. Now, here we are in this beautiful new convention centre, and I, to reach here, of course, had to pass through the construction zone for the biomedical and health precinct, the new hospital, the new nursing training centre, the University Gateway building and so on, SUMRI, which is, of course, already up and running in its space-age centre. And it's possible to believe, when you see all that going on within a short space of here, that Adelaide may indeed transform itself into the smart digital city of its lofty ambitions. You know that I don't come from here, obviously, and my visits are all too brief. But I do get a lot of information ahead of coming here from the organisers, and I do tend to read it all. So it was with that in mind I downloaded this. This is black and white, but I know that the real version of Jay Weatherall's manifesto, his vision for what will make this a great state, is a kind of glossy version. This is my black and white downloaded version, and I did read it all. And I saw in his vision, the headline, in fact, says it all: South Australia is a place where people and business thrive. Well, so it should be. And I read on to the end and found some very optimistic forecasts for 2017. South Australia will increase its minerals and energy production from $7 billion to $10 billion. It'll increase private investment in exploration to $1 billion. That'll be up $350 million. It'll attract many new companies into the state and so on. On food and wine, it will increase exports from 2.8 billion to 3.2 billion. It'll increase South Australia's health research funding. It'll increase the number of foreign students, one of your biggest export earners, coming here from 28,000 to 34,500. There's growth through innovation written into this. There's the R&D boost expected from business. There's a big boost to tourism and so on. And it's all very exciting if you read it without reading the newspapers. And that's, of course, where I came to the kind of reality check. And the first reality check I came across was from ComSec's October State of the States report, which ranks all states and territories on a range of economic performance indicators. And I found that South Australia in this very recent report ranks number 7, just ahead of Tasmania in the final spot. And there's a note too attached to it that says Tasmania is showing better momentum than South Australia. Tasmania, which I've always thought of as being the country's economic basket case, has, according to ComSec, the most potential to improve further. South Australia's gloomy prospects shouldn't surprise anyone here. You're undergoing a major structural change, due largely to the decline in manufacturing. Holden's going, more job losses to come. Some economists argue it's time for the government to do more, to borrow and spend on big infrastructure projects. Others argue, including one on this panel, I might add, that government spending is already leading to structural deficits in this state, which will drive debt and interest bills further and higher and condemn, this is a quote, condemn future generations to poorer government services and higher taxes. And the newspaper headlines that I referred to earlier make for progressively grim reading. 71,000 unemployed a few months back, 8.2%, the worst in the country. In 12 months, 13,000 jobs lost in mining and manufacturing. The Premier says, hang on, we're creating more jobs in the new economy than we're losing in the old economy. Well, in October, the unemployment falled, and we wondered, could that be right? No, in fact not. Older people appear to be giving up in the search for work, so the total unemployed, still intractably high, drops a little to 69,700 people. Now, Jay Weatherall says South Australia can become the global model for economic transformation. Could he be right? Our panel today will help us examine that proposition. Hopefully they'll do so with some smart questions from a very smart audience in this very smart city. And a final point from me, just before we go and introduce our panel, because I'm sure you want to hear from them, not me, and it is this: submarines are the spaceships of the ocean. Or so said the DLP Senator John Madigan on Q&A not so long ago. And like spaceships, of course, they have to be built somewhere. And I guess what you want to be is the kind of NASA of the spaceships of the ocean. So will it all happen at Techport, the shipbuilding facility South Australia invested $300 million in? How big a hit would the South Australian economy suffer, not to mention business confidence and I think community confidence, if that didn't happen? And what would be the political consequences? We have people in this audience who are in very marginal seats. And I wonder what the political consequences would be if that decision goes badly for South Australia. But in the event, let's just imagine that submarines were out of the equation, that shipbuilding was moderate. Could this state still transform itself with health, with research, with international students, biomedical breakthroughs, a focus for services on ageing population, on the ageing population, on food and wine exports, and so on? Please welcome our panellists. And so, as I said, we're going to get each of the panellists to say a few words. I'm going to start with Leanne, based in Tokyo. You've had roles all throughout Asia. How do we capitalise on those growing and emerging markets in Asia, and how specifically do you think South Australian companies could do that? And you can reflect, if you want to, briefly on the various trade deals that might help that happen.
Thank you very much, Tony. So who are we? Just a reminder of who we are. So Mondelez, we're a 3-year-old business with 100 years of history here in Australia, and we have products in 90% of Australian homes. So you probably know us best by our brands such as Cadbury Chocolate and Vegemite and Philadelphia Cheese. And we believe that combination of it's the youth and experience that will help us be able to become Asia's favourite snacking company. Now, we're very bullish, actually, about Asia, and we're also really clear on Australia's role within that. I'm based in Japan, and both Japan and Australia play a really critical role in being able to fuel the growth that we have within the rest of Asia Pacific. So actually, it's conditional upon our growth agenda in Asia Pacific for us to have a really strong and robust Australian business here, as well as in a place like Japan. Now, that comes with its own challenges, being obviously a mature market. And there are really 3 things that we've found that have been absolutely critical for us to continue to have a really strong and consistent business here and allow us to, and give us permission to keep investing, which we've done here, both in manufacturing and also in other areas. And those 3, the first one is innovation, and we've already started to talk about that. But when I mean innovation, I'm not just talking about product innovation like the next, your favourite flavour or caramel flavour of Cadbury Dairy Milk. It's also the end-to-end innovation, right through processing and also through the manufacturing. And in fact, we're investing over $90 million in Australian manufacturing over the next 3 years in our plants across Australia. So that innovation is really important to us. The other thing that we've done is partner with government. In Victoria, for example, we partnered with to develop a food innovation centre so that we can actually get the food industry along with our R&D centre to actually start developing things at the beginning of that R&D cycle. And that's really helped us to be able to find new technologies. And in fact, we've done training workshops and facilitated those training sessions actually with a number of different SMEs, including over 40 South Australian businesses. And that's allowed us also to help introduce some of those small businesses to our retail partners in China. So 6 of those partners have actually now found a route to China to actually sell their products there. The second thing is around talent. It's talent incubation. So we're incubating talent here. I'm one of those. Over a quarter of our leadership team in Asia actually have either worked in Australia or they're Australian themselves. So we see Australia as a huge talent incubator. And the third thing is actually being a magnet for talent. We've got over 50 nationalities represented amongst our 3,000 employees here in Australia. So we see ourselves as being able to actually, in Australia, to be able to develop that talent. So with those 3 things, we believe Australia has actually still has a critical role to play within the growth agenda. And also, I think it actually enables us to be able to fuel the growth elsewhere. And I mean, one of the reasons actually I'm here in Adelaide actually this week as well is that the University of South Australia has a research institute around marketing science, which is globally known and globally recognised, and I'm part of the Australasian Advisory Board. We couldn't actually do our work as well as we do without the University of South Australia and the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. So there are a number of actually things in South Australia that have helped us enormously actually grow our business and be better at what we do. And finally, on the TPP, things like the TPP, absolutely. We're actually a strong supporter of the TPP, and we do see over time that being a big source of competitive advantage for us as well. In my Japan business, for example, I'm often fond of saying I could double the business there overnight if I could actually start to break down some of the regulatory barriers between Japan and other markets, including Australia. So, for example, the natural confectionery company, snakes and dinosaurs, I'd love to involve those in be able to sell those in Japan, but there are actually significant regulatory barriers, and things like the TPP allow me to break that down and actually then be able to export.
Just very briefly on that, Leanne, I mean, TPP, many of the things that are being broken down over time,
yes.
Some 10, 15-year time spans for some of these. So actually there's a fair bit of time for planning if you're a smart business.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, some of those changes do require time in terms of the manufacturing processes and ingredient sourcing, etc., etc. So would I like it faster? Absolutely. We always want things faster in our business, but it still gives us the time to plan that well, and also to plan the productivity improvements around that so that we can actually customise at the right point. Australia doesn't get a free pass because it's a mature market. We have the same demands on our Australia business for productivity improvements and the efficiency of our team in our manufacturing plants as we do in our explosive growth markets like India and China.
All right, let's hear from our other panellists. And Tanya, Monro, how well placed is South Australia in terms of research and innovation? And can that sort of obvious... can we have the obvious benefit from that, which is translated into jobs?
Look, we've got some of the right ingredients and we need to have the courage to change some others. So we have 3 really strong universities that are recognised internationally here. We have research in many areas that is of leading international standard. One of the challenges we have is that the research ecosystem we have and the way research is funded doesn't encourage researchers to engage with industry. It's often seen as second rate to getting competitive research funding. It's not explicitly or implicitly rewarded in the system, and that's simply got to change. But perhaps even a deeper and a longer challenge we've got to recognise is that Australian industry, as it sits at the moment, and in the short term, actually is somewhat mismatched with the research capability we have in Australia, because our research in Australia has developed in some sense with some independence from that research, from that industry base. And the perfect example, while it's of great value to our nation and very important, is health and medical research. More than half of our national research activity and 5% of our industry. So what it shows is that we need to lift our game in terms of nurturing the relationships between industry and research, change the incentive structures to encourage some of our best researchers to engage with industry. But the third key is just entrepreneurship. Encourage our students and staff to be entrepreneurial, encourage entrepreneurs into our labs and to work with our best researchers, because ultimately our greatest export is the one you mentioned before, Tony, is our international students and our students generally. And if they leave us with the sense of having been enabled to be entrepreneurial by their education, the benefits will flow from their success in the world.
Yep, and particularly if they stayed here, which is possible. But just a quick follow-up question, because it's an incredibly competitive field you're in. You're actually competing with other universities around the country. We heard earlier from Con about some of the initiatives being taken up by Melbourne University and others. Is this city, are the universities here powerful enough, well-resourced enough to compete in that field?
Resourcing's always a challenge, but I do think in niche areas that we do have the lead in Australia, and we're connected to those that we need to make things work. I think we've got an opportunity to take a lead nationally, and that's what Priority 4 is all about.
Let's go to Geoff Rohrsheim, and I guess the real question here is, if this wants to be a smart city in the digital economy, if you're obviously better placed than most to tell us whether it's capable of doing that, if we want to be a smart state with a smart city, are they going about it the right way? Are the right things happening to make that happen?
Tony, I think that's the thing that concerns me the most about being an Adelaide boy and being very passionate about SA. My businesses are spread around the country, and ignoring the obvious size difference between the cities in the east, the majority of our work is happening in the eastern states, because we're working with companies on their digital transformation process. And those companies are light years ahead of us, I'm afraid. We know South Australia is an SMB town, a small medium business sort of state, and unfortunately the owners and the CEOs of those companies, who are probably not even here today, because I'm probably preaching to the converted when we're talking today about the innovation, etc. But the people who are running those businesses who need to transform are not here. So through our networks, we really need to get to them and explain to them what is happening at an amazingly fast pace in other states of our country and, of course, overseas.
Are you talking about essentially complacency?
I think it's the ignorance. A lot of it they don't even know. I think they're really, really busy running their business, creating their widgets, doing what they've got to do to make their buck and keep their people employed, and they're just not privy to what's going on.
And how would you, apart from getting to them and trying to explain that, and to some degree you'd be, I suppose, talking to people who are effectively dinosaurs in the technological world, people a bit like myself, how do you actually convince them that digital disruption could actually damage their business, and if they don't get on board with this idea, they could be, like the dinosaurs, extinct?
Oh, it's a good analogy. I think partly we've got to start trying to get some of our best and brightest to study things other than law and accounting, like we've all done over the last 30 or 40 years. Unfortunately, it's still happening. You see that really smart kids are doing law and commerce, or both seems to be the trend at the moment. We need more of them to be studying technology and them getting into those businesses and them to be driving that change, because I don't know that you're going to get the 55-year-old to really totally get it. But they do actually need to understand that it is changing and start listening to their younger people.
Let me go to Mike Rungie, and I guess the question here is, with a sort of increasingly ageing population, not only in South Australia but right across the country, an awful lot of people are going to be staying in work longer. They're going to have to reinvent themselves, aren't they? And just listening to what we've just heard there, that's actually not going to be so easy. Or do you have a more optimistic view?
Tony, it is the challenge for the whole of Western society, but the opportunity for South Australia, because in many ways the rest of Western Australia is not rising to this challenge, and seeing the increasing numbers of older people simply as a problem rather than as an opportunity. Now, it is overwhelmingly an opportunity in South Australia, in a sense, in the way, the scale of the place and the moment we're at. We are very well placed to do something here at the moment. Three big opportunities in terms of ageing society. The first is we are big employers of people. We currently in South Australia employ 32,000 people. We will treble that in the next 35 years. Now, at the moment, that's traditional aged care. If we work to reinvent that into a re-enablement form of aged care, what we actually do is make the jobs more interesting, which is one of the things we're currently doing with Flinders. And secondly, we enable older people to be more productive. I completely resent the idea of a 55-year-old not being able to reinvent. And in fact, we are seeing now large numbers of older people, that is over 60, going back to study, and about 60% of those people are in fact finding work as a result of it.
I'll bring in the connection that you just mentioned there with Colin Sterling and his university in a moment, but everyone has this graph on their table, and the top line graph shows the biggest growth in jobs in this state, and is in the healthcare and social assistance sector, and this has got to be true of the aged care sector generally over time, right? So in fact, if we prepare ourselves correctly and skill up a lower skilled workforce, that everyone will benefit from that.
Yeah. I really want to emphasise there's three opportunities here. One is to reinvent aged care. and it's big numbers already and increases a lot. The second one is to really capitalise on the silver dollar. That is the money that older people will want to spend as consumers, and we particularly know that'll be in areas of leisure, sport, health, learning, those kind of areas, travel. The third one, and by far the most exciting of the three, is that the people themselves are going to want to be have a lot more opportunities to be productive. And what we're already seeing in older countries is if the workforce don't invent those jobs, the older people go out and invent them for themselves. There is no stopping this. And what South Australia could do at this stage is to accelerate that dramatically by all kinds of mechanisms that would encourage work and career reform for people in their 60s, 70s, 80s.
Let me just bring in Colin Sterling here, and you can speak more broadly, but let's start with this point that there is a connection between the two of you. And can you just explain what that is and what you're actually working on?
I mean, there are a number of different things in that space that Flinders is working on. But just to pick up on Mike's point around the medical technologies business, the older people are looking to live independently on their own. They don't want to be in a hospital. They don't want to be in a nursing home. And I'm a bit worried about speaking now because you've raised my antibodies around my accent. I hope it doesn't go down too badly. But the whole medical technologies business is a vast international market. It's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars annually. And it's all about producing the tools, the facilities, the mechanisms that enable people to live more independently, to live more productively, and without needing to rely on very, very expensive hospital care. It's a great area that many people at Flinders are interested in research into. More broadly, I think from the university perspective, universities are a major industry for Australia. We're the third or fourth, depending on which day of the week it is, third or fourth largest export business in the country. So there's a significant amount of economic activity that's being generated by universities, but it's a very commonly held belief that universities don't necessarily always focus on producing graduates that meet the needs of business. And it's very interesting to me. There's a famous Scottish economist who once said that a university education bears little resemblance to the needs of business. His name was Adam Smith. He said it in 1761. Universities have been slow to catch up, but I think just along the lines that Geoff, I think you mentioned, though, that education, like any business, is transforming now, changing in ways that I think are profound. They're deep, and I think that universities now are recognizing the fundamental importance of building the skills that students need when they leave, not just to enter the workplace, but to actually be resilient and to succeed throughout their career in a very complex and changing working environment.
And briefly, Colin, the connection between yourself and Flinders and Mike, it's about, is it not, skilling up in a different way undergraduates who are going to be working in these fields?
It's a real world education. So the students are embedded in a working environment, a learning environment, where they have the opportunity to, if you like, learn almost on the job. And I think that it's leading to, as Mike's described over lunch, interesting ideas that are then coming to his business from students who are generating ideas as they are doing their learning in that environment.
So it sort of begs a question. I mean, since there will be a lot of future jobs in aged care in one form or another, and hopefully in the more positive versions of it, I mean, is that something that smart young people at university are going to be interested in?
Look, I think certainly they are. There's no lack of appetite for the primary healthcare professions among school leavers and young people. But I do think that there's also a huge appetite for then that medical technology space, the innovation, the things that allow us to do the everyday very much more efficiently and effectively. Look at all the devices that people wear these days, all the things that monitor your heart rate, tell you to stand up every 20 minutes. Anyone got one of those? You know, the things that that innovation in that space, I think, is really exciting. And anything that allows people to live healthier, better lives, I think that those ideas, they excite young people.
Okay, we're going to go to a completely different sector now, and I want to hear from Darren Thomas. Thomas Foods obviously have struck some pretty innovative and new deals with our Asian neighbours, particularly with CP Foods. I think it is in Thailand. Tell us what you see as the big opportunities for South Australia in your sector.
Yeah, if I look at the food industry, it's like we're mentioned now as the next boom industry, but the Australian economy has been, over many, many years, agriculture's played some role in it, more prominent than others. Certainly, we're an industry, and if I look at our company, that the word transformation has been used a lot today, and we've certainly gone down that line. If we look at the particular reference to CP, one of the world's largest agricultural food processing companies, they themselves recognised that Australia and in South Australia was a place to come and invest in the food space because of our global access. Our competitive advantage that we have here in South Australia, and we know it's one of the priorities of premium, clean, green food, but also safe food and the global access. So trying to export out of Thailand is somewhat difficult because they don't have the access to markets. So CP certainly saw the opportunity here in South Australia. Our business, obviously, we've tried to move further down the value chain. We have and still are working hard to change this, but a perception that we're just an abattoir. And I was talking to Tony earlier about we need to change that perception, the wonderful jobs that are available. We need PLC.
The perception that I was talking to you about earlier was, I read a piece about you where you actually said we've got to change the idea that little Johnny will be sitting at home and his mother will punish him by saying, "I'm going to send you to work down at the abattoir."
Absolutely. Even we've worked very hard with local principals and schools not to have that mentality. Actually, to say that there's a career in the food processing industry, and you'll see I deliberately say food processing industry because we are. It's more than just meat. Australia, and in particular South Australia, has a wonderful competitive advantage of being able to provide the world's highest quality and safest food, and I can say that without doubt. So we have some challenges, attracting skilled labour into our business, the perception, but there are so many different. If we take our engineering department today, we need a completely different realm of people. So we have been transforming our business. We've been taking on technology, making the world smaller by offering our products digitally. If you look at some of a company like JD.com in China, you can virtually set up a virtual shopfront without having all the infrastructure. So there's smarter ways we can access the over 80 different countries that we export to. So, but we do have some challenges. It's very topical at the moment. You're seeing some of Australia's wealthiest people enter the industry, but I'm more interested in how we can attract the younger generation to either remain or grow the base. I've got this wonderful dilemma at the moment that I've got unprecedented demand for my product, but where's the supply going to come from? And that's my biggest concern. How we can get young people into the industry, how we can get people just to start to stay on the family farm. And I've got to balance that then with the very topical discussion of foreign investment in our agricultural lands, because I take a pretty moderate view. That's probably our quickest opportunity to upscale the industry, to take opportunities. They'll come in and they'll invest hundreds of millions of dollars quickly, but we also need to make sure that we have control of our future. So we have an exciting space.
Does it worry you? Does it worry you when you see the debate reduced to, well, China's buying up all our land?
Absolutely. I think it's very ignorant.
Particularly when most of it's being bought up by America and the UK.
Yeah, exactly. Our largest foreign investor is as the US, as we discussed. So it becomes a little, xenophobic's too strong, but people need to understand, if you talk to a rural CRT dealer in, say, Mungandai, and if there's been a large foreign investor buy up something, they're immediately improving. You talk to him about how his business has grown and how he's been able to create employment. And again, moving away from the traditional agricultural model where we've harvested, whether it's grain or we've just sent the meat off in bulk. Let's do more of the value adding here. Let's learn from perhaps some of the things that happen in the mining sector where we can actually value add and create jobs here in Australia, in particular South Australia.
I'm going to go to Darryl Gobbett now, and I want a bit of a reality check on the economic situation. At the beginning, I talked about the state of the states, ComSec, and of course we're hearing quite positive messages from everyone on the panel. What's your view?
My view is there's huge opportunities. Our issue is we haven't had any private sector growth, or private sector employment growth now since 2010. And I'd say we've had falls in private sector full-time employment over that period. We've lost 30,000 jobs in manufacturing, or about 30% in the last 4 or 5 years. But I see lots of areas where growth is occurring, and it's growing off the back of things which are very local, like Thomas Meads, the aged care. It's also growing in areas where we often don't recognise the intellectual property that we've got. And I believe it's that those areas of comparative advantage, like food processing, and you sort of think intellectual property. We have some of, all due respect, some of Australia's best chocolate makers here in South Australia. Haig's Chocolates. You look at that, you think there's a little business which is actually doing very, very well interstate and globally, and you think, what are the lessons you get from someone like Haig's or Bickford's Drinks? Some of you might remember Bickford's. 6 employees, I think about 15 years ago, now have 60. They export, in a sense, water and flavour to Singapore. You think, not only, and the other great thing I think, the other thing that we don't recognise is, for example, water pricing. Often the rest of the world doesn't even charge for water. We all think that's a bit strange. But we have a lot of intellectual property here in terms of the management of the water systems, the pricing. And you sort of think at some stage the rest of the world is going to wake up and actually want to buy that from us or be educated in it. But I think also when we look at manufacturing, we often say, well, manufacturing can only be metal bashing or motor cars. Where Darren is at the moment, you'd say food processing within another 3 to 4 years will actually be the single biggest manufacturing employer in South Australia. There'll be 30 to 35,000 jobs there. It'll be bigger than any other sector put together. As an economist and as a financial advisor, trying to help people understand investments, I sort of say, well, what are the, and this is like in the aged care, what are the spin-off businesses that come out of that currently exist or may not even exist but will come as a result of it, like technology and aged care? I mean, if you went back 20 years, how many people would have thought about aged care being a high technology area? In 20 years' time, you'd be saying that it will be a magnificent place to work. DuPont, for example, makes carpets that will tell you when Aunt Madge has fallen over and hasn't moved. And you think, what are we doing in that type of space to get into those types of businesses? I see great opportunity in South Australia. I think the biggest issue is...
I think you're about to say it. What is it that's restraining it? What is it
I think we've got to look at the size of the public sector and the cost of the public sector, particularly water. And I think people are going to get a shock with electricity prices over the next couple of years with the Linter are closing down. Yes, you can transport electricity around Australia, but I worked out moving base load power, which is going to happen from your lawn, which is where it's going to come from, to Olympic Dam, that's like transporting electricity from Aberdeen to Warsaw. Now, you wouldn't do that. But we're about to say we can close down a Linter and it won't really matter because we've got all the renewables. Well, the renewables aren't going to be there for base load. So there's the cost and size of the public sector. There's a mental attitude in South Australia that has to be the next big thing's going to save us, like submarines. The commentariat going on about BHP did the wrong thing by South Australia by not expanding, and you say, well, hold on, that's still probably the world's second biggest copper mine, and we're complaining about it? Get over it. And then the issue is to say...
Probably complaining about the price more than anything else.
Well, what are the things that we can do ourselves that are actually going to get us out of this rut rather than relying upon government? And I've been coming to CEDA functions for this part of 30 years, and there is a significant change across who I see here, both in terms of the sex mix, because before it wasn't mixed, and a lot more youthful people and a lot of people from outside manufacturing. And I think that's great. But we've got to sort of say, what are we going to do ourselves to get ourselves out of this, rather than blame the rest of the world and, it's too hard.
Well, it's a perfect time to bring in Don Russell. Because Don, you've been tasked with sort of being a kind of, government sort of messiah, across about 40 different platforms and departments to sort of make sure that the government role accelerates the number of good jobs and the number of successful industries. How are you going to do it, and can you take into account what Darryl just said, which is the real problem is government expenditure?
Well, I'm still at that fortunate stage where people are still saying, thank goodness you're here. It hasn't got yet to "it's all your fault," but
Stick around.
I'm waiting. I'm waiting. But look, yes, I mean, listening to everyone on the panel, it's clear I do have a challenge. I do have a task. I mean, it is just the truth that South Australia is going through this period of extraordinary structural change. South Australia is, I don't know how you want to describe it. You know, we are redesigning it, rebirthing it, changing it, and the reality is that, and this is what you'll get if you read the Productivity Commission report, or if you talk to your local friendly Treasury official, they will say, well, look, it's not a problem. The market will sort itself out. There will be an adjustment that will take place here, and the adjustment will take the form of many people who will leave, and as well as people leaving, there will be a downward adjustment in real wages. I mean, whether that's in terms of people's pay, it'll be in terms of the types of jobs people are doing, they'll be working more casual, whatever. And they'll also say that if people don't leave the state, the real wage adjustment will be even bigger. So, I mean, that's the conventional economic view. Unemployment will not go up forever. It'll come to some equilibrium, but that equilibrium will involve a lot of people leaving the state and a lot of people doing jobs that they don't really cherish. Now, I see my role, and I see the role of everyone on this panel, is making conscious choices about what that transformation actually involves. I mean, if we do nothing, it will be the Productivity Commission outcome, it will be the economists, it'll be the general equilibrium, it'll all sort itself out. But I think what we have got as a state government and as a community, the option of actually involving ourselves in what the nature of that transformation is and what we actually need to do to alter that not particularly attractive set of outcomes. And I think it's the things that people have been talking about on the panel. It's about, you know, building new industries, it's about using research, it's about making sure that the state government, you know, invests its limited resources in the wisest and most effective manner.
How much are you relying on the big project coming along, the submarines? And just to pick up my earlier question, what happens to the economy here and to confidence and to politics if that just doesn't happen?
Well, I think the
or
real
at least
problem,
not a significant.
The real problem with the
proportion
submarines, I think, was if it didn't happen at all, if we actually closed down another industry. I think there's been a major investment in the submarines here in South Australia, and I think if somehow or other there was no local build, that would have been another big negative shock. So I see it more as avoiding a big negative shock than seeing the submarines as a potential saviour of the state. And things are looking much more attractive, I think, on that score.
With the new government, you mean?
With the way the debate's evolved, I think people are now...
Christopher Pyne's injection into it as a sort of proto-defence minister.
No, but I think it was already happening before then. I think people realised that a local build actually had strategic benefits for the country, and I think, you know, whatever happens, the chances are that there will be a local build, and if there's a local build, it'll obviously benefit South Australia.
Now, you mentioned asking your local friendly Treasury official, and of course that's what Darryl was some time ago. He was a Treasury official. I was quickly go back to Darryl.
So was I.
Yeah, not local, but you were a Treasury official. Can governments intervene to fix a flagging economy that needs to have in fact, isn't that the only way you could actually transform an economy that's facing these kind of existential pressures?
I suppose we've got to be very careful about the type of intervention, and often in South Australia it's been business going to the government, and often government meeting them halfway to ask for money to do something, and often the business case wasn't that good underlying anyway, and then often when the government couldn't continue to pay, things fell over. And I suppose my view is that, and this, you know, might be Treasury economist and Productivity Commission and stuff like that, my view is we should be looking at how we get the costs down in South Australia and, say, reduce the level of regulation, which I think most of us would believe is higher than most other states. Because not only would that help the businesses that want to expand, it might also be saying to other businesses, It's your point. You've actually got to get out there and do it yourself rather than rely on government. Now, you know, I was part of a group back in the mid-90s, and it was Internode, for example, was part of that, where they made the offer to actually put wireless right through the Adelaide City Council area. This is in the mid-90s. And essentially the Liberal government at the time said, no, we're not going to do that because Motorola's going to do it. And it never happened. And so you sort of think if you do things, I think, from more of a grassroots, bottom-up, the small, medium-sized businesses, you give them the opportunities to do stuff without actually telling them what to do. There does need to be some support. I think we get a broader-based and more sustainable type of economic growth and employment growth.